Michael Carter? The moment she saw the new bodyguard's name on the security list, Hannah Sinclair, CEO of the Sinclair Group, felt her heart literally stop beating. At first, she reassured herself that it was merely a coincidence. In a country as vast as the United States, duplicate names are hardly a rarity. But then, another name she accidentally overheard shortly after made that coincidence far from simple. It turned into destiny. How on earth could the people she was forced to abandon 30 years ago reappear in her life in exactly this manner? This is the story of a fate that has quietly circled for 30 years, only to one day bring those who thought they were lost to each other forever back face to face. February. Cold, dry air blanketed the financial district of a major American metropolis. The Sinclair Group headquarters was immersed in a solemn black, as if the building itself was shouldering a grief that had not yet settled. Only 3 days had passed since the funeral of the former chairman concluded, yet its aftermath still loomed over everything. Figures in black suits streamed in and out ceaselessly, their footsteps slower than usual, their voices lowered by instinct. The massive structure stood silently amidst the city, bearing an indescribable heaviness, as if buckling under the sheer weight of power, loss, and the inevitable transition. In the boardroom, the executive directors sat in rows, backs straight, eyes wary. No one spoke. No one dared to break that thick, suffocating atmosphere. When the doors opened, the entire room stood up almost in unison. Hannah Sinclair walked in. A perfectly tailored black suit encased her figure. Her face was pale from long, sleepless nights, but her eyes still gleamed with their familiar coldness and alertness. She walked straight to the presiding chair, without hesitation, not glancing at anyone for longer than necessary. Only when she sat down did the others finally take their seats. "Starting tomorrow," Hannah spoke. Her voice was low and clear, brooking no room for doubt. "We will transition to the new operating system. No questions asked, no objections raised." In this position, Hannah Sinclair did not need to offer excessive explanations. The silence in the room was their submission. At the far end of the conference table, Julia Reynolds sat motionless, her hands clasped neatly before her. As a blood relative in this corporate dynasty, and the one once expected to inherit the throne, Julia maintained a mask of composure. Only her eyes betrayed a faint tremor as they locked onto Hannah. The corner of her eye twitched for a split second, before instantly reverting to her signature icy glare. She pursed her lips tightly, her gaze tracking every move of the woman who held absolute power in this room. The meeting ended swiftly. The executives filed out one by one, none lingering a moment longer than necessary. Julia remained seated for a few seconds more, her eyes following Hannah's retreating figure as it vanished behind the door, revealing a flash of naked calculation she hadn't yet managed to conceal. Outside the boardroom, Hannah walked with a steady cadence down the long corridor. Her assistant trailed closely behind, briefing her concisely on the remainder of the day's schedule. When she mentioned the matter of personal security, her voice faltered for a beat. "The new security detail has been finalized," the assistant said. "There is one individual assigned directly to you." Hannah did not break her stride. "Send them in." Minutes later, 2 men entered her office. The head of security gave a brief professional presentation, every detail routine and familiar. Hannah listened without betraying a single emotion. When he finished, he stepped aside, revealing the man standing behind him. "This is Michael Carter," he said, "your new personal bodyguard." In that instant, Hannah's heart skipped a beat. The name rang out with unmistakable clarity. Michael Carter. Hannah stared at the man standing before her. All sound in the room seemed to fade into the distance. She felt a chill run down her spine, even though the temperature in the room hadn't changed at all. "Carter?" she repeated, her voice dropping noticeably lower. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. His tone was calm, professional, devoid of any unnecessary emotion. Hannah nodded, signaling for everyone to leave. Once the door clicked shut, she was left entirely alone in the room. Hannah stood motionless for a long time, her hand pressed against the ice-cold surface of the desk, as if she needed an anchor to keep herself from collapsing. 30 years ago, she had been forced to leave everything behind. And now, fate was quietly bringing those names back, right before her very eyes. Outside, the steady rhythm of Michael's footsteps echoed as he took up his guard position. Hannah did not turn around, but she knew that from this moment on, her tightly controlled life had begun to crack. That morning dragged on slower than usual. Hannah sat in her office, signing the familiar documents and listening to polished reports, but her mind kept slipping away from the present. The name that had just surfaced in the conference room still echoed somewhere, like a sound that refused to fade away. Michael Carter. Every time she thought of it, her chest tightened in silence. When it was time to leave headquarters, Hannah stood up without even glancing at the clock. Michael was exactly where he was supposed to be, standing a few paces away, his eyes scanning the surroundings, his posture straight and impenetrable. He didn't look at her for too long, nor did he show any curiosity. He was simply doing his job. The black car was waiting in the lobby. Hannah stepped into the back seat. Michael closed the door, walked around to the front, and settled into the passenger seat. The car began to roll, merging into the midday traffic. Skyscrapers drifted past the window, reflecting the cold light of winter. A long stretch of silence followed. Hannah leaned back against the seat, her hands resting on her lap. She stared straight ahead, but she wasn't really seeing anything. In her mind, questions appeared one after another, then vanished before they could fully take shape. "How long have you been doing this job?" she asked, her voice steady, as if she were merely breaking the silence. Michael turned his head slightly. "A few years," he replied. No extra details. Hannah nodded. "Where did you work before?" "Also in security," he said. The answer was brief. It offered nothing. Hannah realized he had a habit of speaking only as much as necessary, a habit forged in an environment that demanded controlled speech. She remained silent for a moment longer, then asked, as if casually, "What about your family?" Michael hesitated a beat before answering. "My father teaches martial arts," he said. "He has a small studio." Hannah's hand tightened. It was a very small movement, but enough for her to notice it herself. "What is his name?" she asked. Her voice maintained the necessary composure. "Daniel Carter," Michael replied. In that moment, Hannah could no longer hear the car. The sounds of the city seemed pushed far away. Daniel. The name she had whispered for long years when no one was listening. The name she had tried to bury deep within the past. Hannah turned her face to the window. Traffic lights reflected on the glass surface, stretching into blurry streaks. She did not reveal a single reaction. "Is he well?" she asked after a while. "He's fine," Michael said. "He doesn't say much, but he still works every day." The car stopped in front of Hannah's apartment complex. The driver got out to open the door. Hannah stepped out, keeping her familiar calm demeanor. Before the door closed, she said, "See you tomorrow." Michael nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The door closed. The car drove away. Inside the apartment, silence took over. Hannah stood alone in the living room, not turning on the lights immediately. She stood there for quite a long time, as if listening to something very far away. Then she walked into the bedroom, knelt down before a low cabinet, and pulled out the bottom drawer. A small box lay inside. Hannah opened the lid. Inside were things she had never thrown away. An old photo, the edges frayed. A young man standing in front of a martial arts studio. Beside him was her, much younger, and in her arms, a newborn baby. Hannah sat down on the edge of the bed. Her fingers lightly touched the photograph. 30 years had passed, but that memory had never disappeared. It was simply forced into silence. The next morning, Hannah arrived at headquarters earlier than usual. While the building was still quiet, she opened her computer and entered a name into the internal system. Michael Carter. The profile appeared. Work history was neat. No irregularities. Too neat. Hannah called her assistant. "Recheck the new bodyguard security file," she said. "More detail." The assistant hesitated. "Is there a problem?" "No," Hannah replied. "Just being cautious." She ended the call. When she looked up through the transparent glass of the hallway, Hannah saw Michael standing exactly in his position. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Neither looked away first. The following days passed in a rhythm that seemed normal. Hannah's schedule was denser than ever. Meetings followed one another. Decisions needing signatures allowed no delays. The faces in the conference room changed, but the pressure remained the same. She handled everything with familiar precision, revealing no wavering. At least, not on the outside. Michael was always there. In the long corridors, in front of the elevators, outside the meeting rooms, or behind her during internal events. He didn't speak much. Didn't ask. Didn't pry. His presence was so consistent it almost became part of the space itself. But for Hannah, every time her gaze swept past him, the past trembled slightly. She began to notice small details. The way he stood straight, but not stiff. The way he observed his surroundings without letting his eyes linger too long on anyone. The way he kept just enough distance, as if he was used to existing on the margins of other people's lives. One afternoon, when Hannah left the meeting room later than expected, Julia Reynolds was waiting in the hallway. "We need to talk," Julia said, her voice quiet but clear. Hannah stopped. She looked at Julia for a few seconds, then nodded. 5 minutes. They stepped into a small meeting room nearby. The door closed. No assistants, no outsiders. Just two women standing opposite each other, in the middle of a cold and empty room. "You changed your security team very quickly," Julia said. "After the funeral, after the meeting, I am just curious." "Personal security is essential," Hannah replied, "especially during this period." Julia gave a faint smile. "I don't object. I just find it interesting." "Interesting how?" Hannah asked. "The new bodyguard," Julia said. "Michael Carter. Did you choose him?" Hannah didn't answer immediately. "He meets the requirements." "Carter?" Julia repeated slowly. "A familiar name." Hannah's eyes went cold, ever so slightly. "What are you trying to say?" Julia shrugged. "Nothing at all. It is just that, in your position, every small detail can be exaggerated." "I think you understand." Hannah looked straight at Julia. "If there is nothing else, I have another meeting." Julia smiled lightly. "Of course, I am just worried about the corporation's image." Hannah opened the door and walked out. Michael was already standing in the hallway, his gaze quickly sweeping over Julia before returning to his usual position. No expression, no reaction, but Hannah realized Julia had noticed. That evening, as the car rolled down the familiar road, Hannah said nothing. Michael was silent too. Streetlights shone through the glass, creating long streaks of light. "Is doing this job tiring?" Hannah asked suddenly. Michael turned his head. "I am used to it." "Have you ever thought about doing something else?" she asked. Michael thought for a beat. "I like what I am doing." A simple answer. No defense, no hiding. Hannah nodded. She didn't ask anything else. That night, when she was alone, Hannah opened the old box again. She held the photograph in her hand, looking at it for a long time. The face of the man in the photo was still clear in her memory, and the child in her arms, eyes closed tight, knowing nothing of the world it was about to face. She put the photo down and closed the box. There are things that, no matter how long they have been buried, cannot remain at rest when destiny decides to return. The next morning, Hannah requested an internal report on potential media risks. She gave no reason. It was just a brief, concise request. The assistant asked no questions. In her office, Hannah stood by the window, looking down at the awakening city. The stream of people moved hurriedly, each person carrying their own story. She wondered, among them, how many were living with a past that had never been spoken aloud. Outside the door, Michael stood guard as usual. For the first time in years, Hannah realized a truth she had long avoided. Meeting them again was no longer just a possibility. It had become a reality, and sooner or later, the truth would find a way to surface. The internal report was placed on Hannah's desk late that morning. Not thick, not flashy, just a neatly arranged stack of papers, reflecting the media risks that could arise during the power transition. Hannah turned each page, reading slowly, but her gaze lingered longer on the lines regarding the private lives of leadership, past relationships, and stories once buried that could be dug up at any moment. She closed the file. The words remained vivid in her mind. That afternoon, another meeting took place. Not large. No press. Just the familiar faces of the senior executive board. Hannah sat at the center, her voice steady, her decisions made quickly and cleanly. No one noticed her hand occasionally clenching very slightly beneath the table. After the meeting, Julia Reynolds followed Hannah out into the corridor. This time, she did not hide her scrutiny. "You seem more cautious than usual," Julia said, as if simply making a casual observation. "Circumstances require it," Hannah replied, not slowing her pace. Julia smiled. "Power always comes with curiosity. You know that." Hannah stopped and turned to look at Julia. "If you have something to say it straight." Julia held her silence for a beat. "I just think everyone's past has a way of coming back when we least expect it." Hannah didn't answer. She turned away, ending the conversation right there. Late that afternoon, Hannah left headquarters. Michael was already there, waiting. As the car pulled away, neither of them spoke a word. The city lights had come on early because of the gloomy sky. The light reflected against the car windows, forming blurred patches of color. "Did you move around a lot?" Hannah asked, her voice soft. "Yes," Michael replied, "when I was a child." Hannah stared straight ahead. "Because of your father's work?" "Because of circumstances," he said. The answer wasn't wrong, but it wasn't complete either. Hannah didn't ask anything else. That night, in the quiet of her apartment, Hannah received a brief call from her assistant. Just a notification. There were a few inquiries from the media regarding her new security team. No articles yet. Just initial feelers. "Maintain the stance," Hannah said. No comment. She hung up and stood alone in the center of the dark room. The city lights streamed through the glass, slicing the space into distinct patches of light and shadow. Hannah knew that once curiosity was piqued, it wouldn't stop at harmless questions. The next morning, Hannah arrived at headquarters early. In the elevator, she caught her reflection on the metal surface. A woman standing firm, in control of everything. At least, on the surface. Outside her office, Michael was standing guard. As Hannah approached, he gave a slight nod. A small gesture, but it made her pause for a beat. "Michael," she called out. He turned to her. "Yes?" "In this line of work," Hannah said slowly, "there are some things that are best kept silent." Michael looked at her, his gaze unchanging. "I understand." Hannah nodded. She didn't say another word. As she stepped into her office, the door clicked shut behind her. Elsewhere in the building, Julia Reynolds stood before a window, looking down at the stream of traffic below. In her hand was a phone. The screen lit up, then went dark. A message had been sent, leaving no trace behind. The gears had begun to turn. In the days that followed, inquiries from the media appeared with increasing frequency. At first, they were merely probing calls, emails seeking to verify basic information. No one asked directly. No one made accusations. But Hannah understood exactly how these things began. Curiosity, when fed for long enough, inevitably finds its way to becoming suspicion. During an internal meeting, an assistant placed a news summary directly in front of Hannah. Not a single article mentioned her by name. There were only lines analyzing high-level personnel changes, the new security team, and the unknowns surrounding the board of directors. Hannah scanned through it, then pushed the stack of papers aside. "Keep monitoring," she said. "Do not respond." Michael stood behind her as usual. He did not look at the documents. He did not ask questions. He showed absolutely no interest beyond the scope of his duties. That afternoon, Hannah had an external engagement. A meeting with a longtime partner, held in a private space, with no press allowed. By the time she stepped out, it was already dusk. Michael opened the car door. As Hannah settled into the back seat, she realized her hands were slightly cold. "The weather is turning colder faster than I thought," she said, as if making a casual observation. "That is correct," Michael replied. "It is typical for this season." The car pulled away. Streetlights flickered on, section by section. Hannah gazed out the window, her mind drifting to another place. 30 years ago, she had also sat in a car just like this, watching the scenery recede behind her, not knowing where she was headed. She only knew that there were certain things she could not take with her. "Do you remember much about your childhood?" Hannah asked, her voice light, but not entirely without purpose. Michael remained silent for a beat. "Not much," he said. "Just fragments." "What kind of fragments?" she asked. "A small room," he replied. "The smell of wood, the sound of training, and a woman." Hannah held her breath for a very brief moment. "Do you remember her face?" she asked. Michael shook his head. "Not clearly. I only remember the feeling." Hannah said nothing more. She turned her face toward the window glass. The lights outside blurred into streaks. That night, Hannah did not open the old box. She stood by the window for a long time, watching the city stretch out below. In her mind, questions piled up. If Michael was truly the person she was thinking of, then how many other truths had been twisted over the last 30 years? The next morning, Hannah was informed that an article was about to be published. It did not name her. No accusations. But it was suggestive enough to steer public opinion. Her assistant waited for instructions. "Prepare a response," Hannah said. "But do not use it yet." She knew the time had not yet come. During that same time, Julia Reynolds was at a private meeting, off the record. No assistance. Just a short conversation in a discreet location. Julia did not say much. She simply asked a few questions, just enough to spark interest. The rest, she left for others to deduce. Late that afternoon, Hannah left headquarters. Michael was still there. As they walked through the lobby, Hannah felt a few unusual glances. Not obvious, but enough to notice. When the car stopped in front of her apartment, Hannah did not get out immediately. She stared straight ahead. "Michael?" she said. "Yes," he replied. "If you ever feel this job is becoming more complicated than usual," Hannah said slowly, "you can tell me." Michael turned his head. He looked at her through the rearview mirror. "I know what I am doing," he said, "and I know my limits." Hannah nodded. It was the answer she expected. But it was not the answer that put her mind at ease. As Hannah stepped into the apartment, the door closed behind her. She stood still for a long time. Things that had been buried were slowly rising to the surface. And this time, she was not sure she could control everything like before. The article appeared the very next morning, just as Hannah had predicted. No sensational headlines, no names explicitly mentioned. Just a long, analytical piece speaking of unusual changes within the Sinclair Group's leadership. It discussed the CEO's personal security team being replaced immediately after the funeral. It hinted at unclear connections between power and private life. The article ended with an open question, accusing no one, but enough to sow the seeds of doubt. Hannah read the article once, then she read it again. She was not angry. She was not surprised. She only felt something familiar, the sensation of being watched, of being waited on to make a mistake. In the brief meeting with the media team, Hannah gave clear instructions. No reaction, no denial, no confirmation. Everyone nodded. They were used to her style, control through silence. But silence could not stop the questions outside the conference room. When Hannah left headquarters in the afternoon, there was a strange car parked near the lobby. No logos, not drawing attention, but enough for Michael to notice. He slowed his pace by half a step, a very slight shift in position, creating a natural shield as Hannah walked past. "Nothing to worry about," he said softly once they were seated in the car. "Just curiosity." Hannah nodded. Curiosity is always the beginning. The car rolled forward. The city remained the same, but Hannah felt that every gaze lingered longer than usual. She did not turn her head. She knew she was no longer at the stage where she could pretend not to notice. That evening, Hannah received a call from a former board member. The voice on the other end carried a sense of hesitation. The questions were asked in circles, as if no one wanted to be the one to say what was actually being thought. Hannah answered briefly, neutral, revealing no emotion. When the call ended, she sat still for several minutes, hands placed on the table, eyes staring into the void before her. She remembered an afternoon from long ago where there were questions like that too. Polite voices, just the same. And it was from that very moment that everything began to slip out of control. The next morning, Hannah ordered another internal review, not regarding the media, but about personnel history, old names, connections that had been overlooked. She didn't state her purpose. She only demanded absolute accuracy. Michael stood outside her office while she worked. At times, Hannah felt his presence more clearly than before. Not because he was doing anything differently, but because she could no longer view him as just an invisible part of the room. At noon, as they grabbed a quick lunch in a small meeting room between schedules, Hannah looked at him and asked, "Did you ever want to know more about your mother?" The question came out of nowhere. Michael looked up. "Yes," he replied after a beat. "But then I got used to not knowing." "Didn't your father say anything?" Hannah asked. "He said there are things that don't always have answers," Michael replied, "and that some people leave, not because they want to." That sentence lingered in Hannah's mind for a long time. By afternoon, a new piece of information arrived in her private inbox. Not through an assistant. No signature. Just a single attachment. An old copy? A file from 30 years ago with redacted sections, yet still clear enough to reveal the crucial details. Hannah stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't open it immediately. She knew that once she opened it, there would be no turning back. Finally, she clicked. The lines of text appeared, dragging up memories that had been forced into slumber. A decision, a signature, an arrangement referred to by many different names, yet possessing only one true nature. Separation. Hannah closed her laptop. She stood up and walked to the window. Below, the city continued to move, unaware that an old story was slowly rising to the surface. Out in the corridor, Michael was still standing there, and Hannah understood that time was no longer on her side. The press conference was scheduled for the very next morning. No long-winded statements, no diversionary tactics. Hannah only requested a conference room large enough, with stable lighting and absolutely no limits on questions. The media team objected in silence, but no one spoke a word. They understood that once Hannah Sinclair had made up her mind, all other options became redundant. The news spread fast. In front of the corporate headquarters, television vans lined up bumper to bumper, clogging the entrance. Reporters stood in small clusters, checking their equipment, speaking in low but urgent tones. The atmosphere was no different from a public trial, missing only the dock for the accused. In the waiting room behind the hall, Hannah sat alone. The suit she chose was not black, nor was it bright. It was a neutral color. It did not suggest mourning, nor did it create an air of defensiveness. She sat with her back straight, hands resting on her lap, eyes staring straight ahead. There were no documents in front of her, no notes. Michael stood outside the door. He knew today was unlike any other day, not because of the crowd, but because of the unnatural silence of the woman behind that door. He stood his ground, keeping his distance, but for the first time, he felt his job was no longer simply about security. When the signal was given, Hannah stood up. The door opened. Flashbulbs erupted immediately. A murmur spread throughout the room. Hannah stepped out, never stopping, never looking left or right. She sat down before the bank of microphones, adjusted her chair ever so slightly, and then raised her head. The room fell silent. "I will be brief," Hannah began. Her voice was clear. It did not tremble. "I know there are questions being asked, and I understand why." A few pens began to move. 30 years ago," she continued, "I was forced to leave the man I loved and my newborn child." A wave of commotion rippled through the crowd. Hannah did not stop. "It was not my choice, but it was something I accepted because I believed that silence would protect the others." She paused a beat, not to breathe, but to let the room catch up. "Today, I realized I was wrong." The air froze. "I am not saying this to ask for sympathy. I say it for the truth. The bodyguard currently working for me is my son." This time, the commotion could not be contained. Hannah placed both hands on the table, holding her ground. "I did not know it when I hired him, and when I found out, I did not handle it correctly. I stayed silent. I hesitated. I thought I could still control everything as before." Her gaze swept the room, unflinching. If this truth makes me unworthy of my current position, I will accept it. But I will not continue to deny my son's existence. A hand went up, then another, then many more. Hannah did not answer immediately. She finished first. I am ready to answer every question, but not today. She stood up. No bowing, no apologies, no running away. When Hannah left the hall, Michael was standing at the end of the corridor. His eyes met hers. This time, no professional distance was wide enough to hide the truth. Outside, the sound of the crowd was chaotic. Inside, the long corridor was empty. Hannah stopped in front of him. "We need to talk," she said. Michael nodded. He asked nothing more. This time, no roles remained intact. They did not speak immediately. Hannah walked ahead. Michael followed, turning into a side passage leading away from the main building area. There were no reporters there, no cameras, just a narrow hallway, pale yellow light, and silence so deep they could hear their own footsteps. The door to the parking lot closed behind them. In that moment, every role was left inside. No more CEO, no more bodyguard, no more distance defined by contracts or titles. Hannah stopped. She turned to face Michael. The distance between them was now only a few steps. "I have no right to ask you to understand," Hannah said. Her voice was low. It did not tremble, but the familiar coldness was gone. "Nor do I expect your forgiveness." Michael stood perfectly still. His gaze did not waver. Yet, he did not scrutinize her. "Did you know?" he asked. Hannah shook her head. "No, I did not know." "Then why now?" Michael pressed. "Why say it at all?" Hannah took a slow, deep breath. "Because if I remain silent, I will be doing exactly what I did 30 years ago, denying it and letting others decide for me." Michael did not answer immediately. He turned away for a beat, looking out into the distance where the city lights still flickered. "My father never spoke ill of you," he said. "He only said that some people are forced to leave, and that there are choices that are never truly choices." Hannah closed her eyes for the briefest moment. "I did not come here to change your life," she said. "You do not have to do anything. You do not need to stay. You do not need to leave. The decision is yours." Michael turned back to look at her. "And what about you?" Hannah remained silent. "I have lived for 30 years with a decision that was not my own," she said slowly. "Today, just for this once, I wanted to take responsibility for the truth." There were no tears. There were no embraces. Just two people standing opposite one another, sharing something that neither was quite ready to fully name. The phone buzzed in Hannah's pocket. She did not look. She did not need to look. She knew exactly what was happening out there. The calls, the emergency meetings, the advice, the warnings. Julia Reynolds was the first to step forward with a public reaction. A brief statement was released that very afternoon. It contained no personal criticism. It made no accusations. It was simply a call for transparency and a review of leadership standards. The wording was cautious, but the message was unmistakable. Hannah read the statement that evening, alone in her apartment. She was not surprised. Julia had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Elsewhere in the city, Michael sat across from his father in the familiar martial arts studio. There were no students, no sounds of training. Only the scent of old wood and the silence of a space that had witnessed so many years go by. "I met her," Michael said. Daniel Carter nodded. "I know." "I don't know what to think," Michael continued. Daniel looked at his son, his gaze steady and calm. "You don't need to think right now. Some truths do not demand an immediate reaction. Michael remained silent. You don't owe anyone a role to play, Daniel said. You just need to be true to yourself. That night, Hannah did not sleep. She sat at her table, staring at the documents spread out before her. The choices were laid out more clearly than ever. Stay, leave, fight, or let go. For the first time, she felt no fear at the prospect of losing power. She only feared repeating the same mistake. Outside, the city was still bright, and somewhere, a final chapter was waiting to be written. The next morning, public reaction spread faster than anyone had predicted. Huge headlines appeared everywhere. There was criticism. There was suspicion. But there were also other voices. Slower voices, more cautious voices. They began to question what had happened 30 years ago. They questioned power, silence, and the price that the weak had been forced to pay. Hannah did not give a single interview. She delegated all responses to her media team, maintaining exactly one stance. No denials, no justifications, only a confirmation of the truth that had been spoken. In the emergency executive board meetings, familiar faces became cautious. The exchanges were no longer domineering. Everyone understood that the scales had tipped. No one held the upper hand anymore. Julia Reynolds continued to appear in public, positioning herself as an advocate for standards and accountability. But this time, the questions began to turn back on her. Questions about the role of the business family in the past, about decisions once made in the name of the common good. Old documents were brought up. Details that had once been ignored were gradually being pieced together. The certainty in Julia's voice began to crack. 1 week after the press conference, Hannah did not go to headquarters. She went somewhere else, a martial arts studio nestled in a quiet neighborhood. No large sign, no outsiders, just the smell of wood, worn practice mats, and natural light streaming through the windows. Michael was standing there when Hannah walked in. Daniel Carter was there too. No one spoke for the first few seconds. No introductions needed, no explanations needed. 30 years compressed into a brief silence. Hannah bowed her head very slightly, not a ritual. Just a gesture she had carried for too long. Thank you, she said to Daniel, for raising my son. Daniel nodded. I only did what had to be done. Michael stood between them. The tension of the past days was gone. In its place was only the hesitation of people learning to stand beside each other, for the first time, without predefined roles. No promises, no grand decisions, just presence. In the days that followed, Hannah issued a brief announcement. She temporarily withdrew from direct executive control, transferring power according to proper procedure. Not because of pressure, not because of force, simply because she chose to take responsibility in her own way. Julia Reynolds no longer appeared in strategic meetings. Her position was under review. What had once been shielded by family influence could no longer stand firm against the light of public opinion and the records of the past. Time passed. A foundation was established, bearing the name Michael Carter. No fanfare, no excessive publicity. It focused solely on supporting those pushed to the margins by decisions they had no voice in making. Single mothers. Children growing up in the void of silence. Hannah did not stand at the forefront. She remained in the background, quiet, steadfast. On certain afternoons, she would stop by the martial arts studio, not to train, simply to sit there and listen. Sometimes a brief laugh. Sometimes a comfortable silence. Not every wound had vanished, but they were no longer denied. 30 years after fate tore them apart, it was the truth that brought them back into the same space. Not to return to the past. but to move forward, this time, in the light. The story ends there. Not with power, not with victory, but with a choice, late yet necessary, made by people who finally dared to live true to themselves.